Hello, I'm Rich Tabor of Cornell Cooperative Extension of Chenango County, New York, working with the Cornell Small Farms Grassland Utilization Team. And today we're going to be looking at some strategies to manage your pastures throughout the season with a particular emphasis on drought years such as we have had this year. And we'll look at some other strategies to manage your grazing supplies throughout the grazing season. Now this graphic shows us that in the springtime the quality of grass is very high and very high in quantity, and then it drops off during the summer, during the drier months, and then a slight increase again in the autumn when rains typically return. And we are attempting to keep our forages at that spring level of quality by management intensive grazing. There are three different phases of pasture growth. Phase 1, the leafy immature stage, and Phase 2, the leafy mature stage, and Phase 3, a stemmy, tall, over-mature stage. And one of the biggest challenges to management intensive grazing is to manage our grassland resources so that the cows are always being moved on to those earlier nutritious stages of plant growth. This year we had tremendous challenges because that summer slump came early and stayed very late, and so a lot of our pastures were short. And in a historical context, grazing fell into disfavor because farmers would let cows out in the spring during the spring flush and then graze all summer, and then milk would drop off, and so people went to stored forages and all that resulting expense of machinery. And now we learned that grazing cows in paddocks for certain periods of time, 24 hours, is good. However, nature every year throws curveballs at us. Some years are extremely wet, or as this year we've had a tremendous drought all over much of the country. And we know that we would like to feed cows in 8-inch high grazing paddocks and let them graze it down to 4 inches. And it's a challenge in years such as we have had like this. And we have learned in our experiences of rotational grazing that dairy cows do best when turned into paddocks where the grass is about 8 inches tall and they can graze it down to about 4 inches in height in about a 12 to 24 hour period. And now we're going to go out to the farm of Oscar Robinson, where he milks Holstein and Brown Swiss dairy cattle on an organic dairy farm in a grazing situation. And we're going to visit with him about some of the strategies he uses to extend his grazing supplies.
Getting into some of the specifics, again, you've got a pretty good-sized dairy herd here, mostly Brown Swiss. As far as, again, determining, like the duration that you would have your milking cows on a particular section, maybe what most people call a paddock, what time frame do they stay on an individual paddock before you move them on to, say, the next fresh paddock?
Well, we try to move them every milking. I mean, that's our goal, but
and you're on 2 times a day milking, so it's every 12.
2 times a day milking, so we move them twice a day. Except this one pasture here we haven't divided up yet. We haven't kind of figured out how we're going to divide it up yet, so that's still in the works to do that. So they'll come up here at night for maybe a week at a time and rotate them around after that. So
okay, as far as like and the time frame between when they hit up an individual paddock, of course, then they graze it for the period of time that you described, somewhere around 12 hours, and then you move them on to the next paddock. How much time would it be before that same herd would return back to that first starting paddock or any other paddock, during the growing season?
well, our initial rotation when they go outside is around 12 days.
Okay, so they about 12 days between the subsequent grazing at the same spot.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then later in the year, I assume that changes.
Yeah. When it gets drier, we there's 2 meadows I have right now that we take first cutting and second cutting off of the one meadow. There's 30 acres in that. Then towards the end of July, 1st of August, we'll turn them into that 30-acre meadow, and that'll last them pretty near a month there. Then there's a second meadow we have, which 46 acres were available to them.
We've talked quite a bit about, the conditions that you have to adapt to in the spring. However, because we've got primarily cool season grasses and forages that respond differently with the increasing temperature and dryness of the soil later on in the season, how do you manage your grazing to adapt to those kind of conditions?
When it's dry, it's dry. I mean, we try to work around the best we can. I mean, I'm limited, kind of. Maybe my grasses, I need to do a little bit more work in them, with them, and what I have in my pastures.
In terms of what's there,
Is what's there, maybe a little bit more of a drought hardy kind of a grass or something. I don't know, but like this year, I mean, we instead of the meadows where we taking hay off of, we after feed this year. Instead of taking third cutting off the one meadow, we turn the cows into it. So
okay. So you adapt. It sounds like by kind of shifting how you use some of the ground instead of being strictly hay production or some hay production. It's like, well, they got to keep on grazing, and I'll just sacrifice all that stored feed to keep the animals going on a pasture scenario.
Right, yeah, because the one meadow we try not to turn them into until 1st of August. This year they're in it, I think the second week of July. So I mean, we turned them into the meadow earlier than we normally would. There wasn't as much in there, but we had the other pasture, the other meadow. We instead of taking the third cutting off out, we turned them right into that. So we used that was available. We used it, and of course we had to feed more hay in the barn than we normally do. But
and your hay primarily is baleage.
All baleage, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So you just that drought's drought. There's unless you irrigate or something, there's not much you do the best you can with it. So.
Yeah.
Well, here are some strategies for dealing with drought. Any number might be applicable to your farm in a given year. You might have to feed some stored forages. You might have to build an extra inventory of stored forages for next year's drought. And you might be able to stockpile some pastures for dry cows and heifers for use later on in the season. And maybe planting some drought-resistant species would work for both grasses and legumes. You might have to limit the time the cows have to graze and make up the dry matter intake with other forages. You might have to use some pastures that have been machine harvested earlier, and now you're going to use them for grazing later on in the season instead of taking a second or third cut. Maybe some summer annuals might come in handy on your farm, such as cereal grains or sorghum Sudan grass. And finally, you've got to get out there and monitor your pastures and monitor your cows. And we hope that the information that you have found in this film may provide you with some useful ideas to incorporate in your own operation.